Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Well, Elon Musk is now the richest person on the planet.
More than half the satellites in space are owned and controlled by one man.
Well, he's a legitimate super genius. I mean, legitimate.
He says he's always voted for Democrats, but this year it will be different. He'll vote Republican.
There is a reason the U.S. government is so reliant on him.
Elon Musk is a scam artist, and he's done nothing.
Anything he does is fascinating to people.
Welcome to Elon Inc., Bloomberg's weekly podcast about Elon Musk. It's Tuesday, September 17th. I'm your host, David Papadopoulos. Now, following Elon can be a lot. One day he'll ekes out a wild conspiracy theory or offer to give Taylor Swift a child, and the next, he's inking some multi-billion-dollar government contract or meeting with a powerful world leader. You just never know what you're going to get when you open the newspaper. Will it be Dr. Elon? Or will it be Mr. Musk? Sometimes it's a little of both, as was the case this past week. In recent days, Elon somehow inserted himself in the center of some of the most controversial and ugly moments of a presidential campaign season that has been, frankly, nothing but controversial and ugly. Meanwhile, his company SpaceX made history one day and then landed a seriously good contract the other. To cure the spinning in my head, I'm joined in the studio by our regulars, Elon Musk reporter Dana Hull. Hey there, Dana.
Hey, hey.
Business Week writer Max Chafkin. Max.
Hey, David.
And Sarah Fryer, who runs our big tech coverage. Sarah, hello.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so and then later on, we're going to be joined by Eric Johnson, our space editor, to talk SpaceX. But Sarah, let's start with the eeksing. So as far as I could tell, and I was doing my darndest not to pay too much attention, but mostly failing, I've seen Elon on some kind of roll. He did his best to spread the rumor that Haitian immigrants are consuming cats and dogs. He did indeed tell Taylor Swift that he would give her a child. And then, in the wake of what appears to be a second assassination attempt on the former president, Donald Trump, he wondered in an eeks why no one is taking a crack at Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Sarah, he would go on to delete that eeks, but the damage was done.
The deleting was probably the most surprising part of that. The fact that he, backed down and took it back. I think we are just seeing Musk go on an absolute power trip over these conspiracies that I think are very popular in the Trump-Vance world, but of course have little connection or no connection in the case of the Haitian conspiracy to reality. And I think that it doesn't matter for Musk. When he took over Twitter, if you remember, he said, humor is allowed on the internet again. Those aren't his exact words, but he sees this as playing online, trolling and shit posting. And am I allowed to say shit posting?
You just did.
I just did. That is, I think, the technical term for just going absolutely wild on the internet against your rivals, and then saying it was all a joke, which is what he said about that Kamala, Biden, why haven't they been assassinated yet comment. Of course, these things that he does do not exist in some, X group chat vacuum that he has. They have real world implications. There have been bomb threats on schools in Springfield, where one of the cities that has been a target of those anti-immigrant rumors, and coming out and adding fuel to that fire has real world danger. And it really, doesn't seem to resonate with Musk that that's something that he is control of, or maybe if he does sense that he has power over it, he doesn't care.
What's weird to me about this is that Musk is someone who is deeply paranoid about his own security, right? I mean, he travels with a phalanx of bodyguards. He has young kids. there are all kinds of like fans and stalkers who are trying to like climb over the SpaceX fence to get to him. And there was actually like a disgruntled Tesla employee who drove to Austin from Minnesota after threatening to kill both Joe Biden and Elon. Fortunately, like the cops got wind of it ahead of time and they arrested this guy. But like Musk knows that like there are serious attempts, on all political leaders and on himself. And so for someone who is so paranoid about his own security to kind of make this flippant quote unquote joke about the current president, I mean, I just sort of wonder legally if it's incitement to violence, because that's certainly what critics are saying. And I wonder, like, he left it up for hours. It got 40 million impressions. Did he take it down because he got a phone call from the FBI or the Secret Service, or was there just like enough of a backlash among his employees? Like, I mean, that tweet was up for quite a long time, and now he's just sort of back at it again today.
Yeah. Well, Max, you looked into the legality question. What'd you find?
So the United States famously has a very expansive view of free speech, much more expansive than in other countries. What Musk did is probably legal. The Supreme Court has held that it needs to be a true threat. In other words, if you're joking, if you're just spouting off, if you're engaging in political speech, I think all of those are potential explanations for what Musk was doing. And of course, he offered the joking explanation. You're allowed to use violent metaphors and so on. So it's unlikely that it's illegal. But I do think Dan is probably right that somebody in a position of authority may have complained because, of course, Musk isn't just a regular guy. He's got a huge following, and the words that he is saying have consequences for real people. And Sarah brought up what's happened in Springfield, Ohio, where schools have closed, where people are suffering because of these lies that are being transmitted, generated by Elon Musk and others on his platform. And we're seeing another version of it. He took it down and offered kind of a lame explanation that doesn't make sense because I don't think it was funny. But of course he's saying it was a joke. So hopefully he won't suggest that any other public figures need to be assassinated in the future.
It's just so frequently the response to this kind of thing is that, outrage from liberals is kind of the goal. Like when this kind of thing happens, it's like, oh my God, we made them freak out again. Like, how do they not understand our humor? Like, why are they such, I remember the term snowflakes in the earlier Trump administration, right? This is almost a means to provoke, to get a reaction. To troll. And I think that the Kamala Harris campaign, their strategy is to kind of like point and laugh when Republicans do that instead of leaning into the, oh my gosh, we're so horrified, this is so scary.
Sarah, which is what she did so effectively during the debate when Trump launched into his whole in Springfield, they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. She did break out into laughter. I guess the other question I have, though, Max, is when he took it down and before he did, I wonder if the government had particular leverage on him, given the nature of the contracts that he's got with the Defense Department, with NASA, with other departments across the government.
I mean, I have to think it didn't get that far. I mean, it does. There is like something strange and potentially interesting about a major defense contractor. First of all, a major defense contractor getting so involved in the political process as Elon Musk has, but also, obviously like going more towards like tiptoeing the line towards incitement. Like that seems like the kind of thing that the Defense Department and others probably consider problematic. But my guess is like FBI, somebody in a position of authority gave him a friendly call and suggested that what he was doing was dangerous without having to exert any extra pressure.
And Dana, so I guess this has got me just thinking that the whole thing, especially this rat-a-tat-tat, rapid fire, him inserting himself into one of these, big issues after another and really throwing himself into the political sphere is just a window into the extreme politicization of Elon Musk.
Well, the way that I think of it is twofold. So on the one hand, Musk is using his money. He created a super PAC called America PAC. They are not just funding, helping to fund the Trump campaign, but they are now going down ballot. Like we have a story out this morning based on an FEC filing that I spotted really late last night. They are now funding like over 15 House races in key districts in Maine, in Nebraska, California, Ohio, New Jersey, New York. Like he is all in. He's like the new Sheldon Adelson, right? In terms of just like funding not just Trump, but very key congressional races in an attempt to keep the House. But separately, the way that he behaves on X, the platform that he owns, is like an in-kind contribution to the Trump campaign because Trump and Vance are running on immigration and fear, and Elon Musk is all about amplifying those fears and amplifying all of this nonsense about, immigration and crime. And so it's like a tacit, I don't know if the campaigns are coordinating, but like that is the main message of the Trump-Vance campaign, and those are the main messages that Musk is amplifying on the platform that he owns.
No, that's absolutely right. And I guess the question I have for you guys is, to me, as I watched the way it played out, 2 days later at the debate, it comes out of Trump's mouth in that ramble. It comes off to me, watching it from afar, as patently absurd and a losing hand for the Republicans and for their candidate.
It's not a losing hand because it's all anyone is talking about. Like it's like it is a strategy because all of a sudden everyone is talking about cats and dogs and Haiti and immigration and not the economy and abortion rights. And it is a strategy.
There's a difference, though, between saying it's a good strategy and it's a strategy. I think Dan is right. It is a strategy. And depending on what happens, we can conclude that it was good or bad, but it's not on its face a good strategy. I think most people, when you look at the polling of that debate, the polling were very much in Harris's favor. We've talked about the ways that Elon Musk has sort of red-pilled himself into the fringe and how that is bad for business. I think it's also bad for Donald Trump. The fringe is not a majority.
But if you watch the debate, sure. But people aren't getting their information from the events as they happen anymore. They're getting the information as it's recycled and remixed by online commentators. And so in that world, it doesn't actually matter if something is true. It just matters if one of the people you follow who you admire says it's good for Trump or
that's definitely a fair point. And, all shall be revealed when they cast the votes in early November. But, Sarah, I would say that, A, lot of people actually did watch that debate. I don't remember the exact number, but it was a significant chunk of the population. And B, again, I get how everyone's talking about it. But, when Hillary Clinton made that big mistake of uttering the words, calling a large chunk of the Trump supporters, what was it, a basket of deplorables?
Deplorables.
Everybody was talking about that as well, and that was an unmitigated disaster for her campaign. But, Dana, you've been doing a lot of reporting on the activity of Musk's PAC. I believe you guys have reported recently that we've seen some of the numbers in terms of the kind of money they've actually been spending in the last couple months.
Yeah, I mean, the filings tick up every, there's basically like a filing every night that looks at their expenditures. And the total spent by the PAC is $50 million. And this is on everything from text messages to mailers to hiring door knockers in key states like North Carolina and Michigan. But Musk is also going down ballot. And in this filing last night, you're seeing them spend, it's like roughly $2 million on like 15 different House races. And that might not sound like a lot of money, but like we're going to continue to see spending between now and November. And just the fact that they are now targeting the House just shows that like Musk is going for the trifecta. And, these are key races that could swing, they're just going to be very important.
Yeah, we've got actually one of the ads here that has been produced by his PAC. Let's listen to it now.
If you sit this election out, Kamala and the crazies will win. That means you'll be stuck with higher costs and more illegals invading our country. Trump is the American badass who'll stop this nonsense. Vote for Trump and save America.
What this whole thing strikes me as a lifelong gambler who knows what it's like as you're getting towards the end of the day at the races and you're down money, Max, is, you start doubling and tripling down to try to get out and try to get back to even or up money. I get the sense that when he launched in and threw his support behind Trump, things were looking rosy and pretty darn good. And now that they're looking a little less good, he's like, I get a little bit of this double and triple down sense.
I mean, I think that Dana and Sarah are both hinting at this in various ways, but turning out your base is like one part of how you win an election. And I think you could you can interpret this ad in that way as this is a way to increase turnout among people who are likely to support President Trump. On the other hand, it does feel just just not something that is going to sway a swing voter. Just taking a couple steps back, one thing that has struck me listening to Dana and reading her reporting is just when Elon Musk first started talking about these donations, right, there was all of this question, is he really going to do it? He kind of created all this uncertainty. He's like, I'm not supporting Trump. I'm just creating a meritocratic PAC or whatever. And that's all out the window, right? And it's not only out the window in the sense that he is all in for Trump, as you're saying, as we're all saying, but also in the sense that he's spending real money. We're at $53 million. That's where it is. I just looked. According to OpenSecrets.com, it could be a day or something late, but that's fairly up to date in terms of how much money they spent. That's a big number. That makes it one of the biggest independent committees this cycle to date. And it's going to go up from there. We're going to look back on this as being an election where Elon Musk put a significant amount of money to work. Comparing him to Sheldon Adelson, I think, is the correct comparison.
And for the uninitiated, Sheldon Adelson was
a prominent, a very wealthy Republican donor who donated to conservative causes and was Trump's main backer. Elon Musk, his rationale for supporting Trump was he watched the assassination attempt, the first assassination attempt, and thought wow, this guy is really tough. And that was how he explained his rationale of support.
We need to say goodbye to Sarah, but Max and Dana, don't go anywhere. Sarah, we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're now done with politics and conspiracy theories. We're done with Mr. Musk. We shall now move on to Dr. Elon and his business empire, which up in space is doing quite well. Last week, his space company, SpaceX, pulled off the first commercial spacewalk in history. And then a day or so later, a unit of SpaceX, Starlink, signed a big deal to provide the internet to United Airlines. And to talk about that, we've got Eric Johnson, our crack space editor. Hey there, Eric.
Good to be here.
Okay, Eric, so it's my understanding here that with this SpaceX commercial spacewalk they pulled off, that there are a few records and firsts achieved. Hit us with them.
That's right. So it was a big week for SpaceX. You saw 4 crew, civilians, relatively untrained astronauts, go up and perform the world's first commercial spacewalk.
Sorry, Eric, let me interrupt you for a second and say, by the way, when we say spacewalk throughout the show here, our listeners won't see it, but we're going to do air quotes around walk. Okay, spacewalk.
I was waiting for you to jump in on that. So just to be clear, they didn't actually walk anywhere, right? This wasn't like the Apollo era moon landings, but they did go 1,400 kilometers up, which is the furthest that humans have gone since the moon landings. And so that was an incredible milestone. Another thing that they achieved was actually depressurizing the capsule in the middle of all this to set up the walk. And so they actually opened the hatch and exposed the entire interior to the vacuum of space. And so 2 of them, billionaire Jared Isaacman and SpaceX's Sarah Gillis, an engineer, actually took turns and for a few minutes popped halfway out of the capsule, roughly.
Yeah, they looked like ferrets popping out of a hole or something
or like a turtle putting his head out and then sucking it back in. But, to be fair, they were hurtling around the Earth at, 17,000 miles per hour. It's dangerous, precarious. And so they emerged from the capsule. They did some maneuvers with a relatively sleek and skinnier spacesuit that SpaceX designed and to test the mobility of it. And then went back in, returned pressure to the cabin, and came home. Just for people to understand, I mean, they were higher up than the International Space Station. And so, everybody knows that spacewalks are relatively common. I mean, we've seen them, of course, in Hollywood, but we see the astronauts in their huge, bulky spacesuits go out the ISS and they do repairs and different fixes on the station. But this was the first. This is different than that in that they were in their own spacecraft, separate from anything else and exposed to the vacuum of space for the duration.
Yeah, now I get the sense here that a lot of this mission was about those super cool, sleek spacesuits and testing them out. Was that and I guess in addition to charging this billionaire money to give him this spacewalk, was it all about testing out these suits?
That was a major mission parameter is, we don't exactly know what SpaceX intends to do with these suits, but visually, at least aesthetically, I mean, SpaceX, Elon Musk, they love aesthetics. So if you compare the suits they were wearing to the traditional suits, they were, thinner and
you were going to call them skinny
at
suits.
Least visually.
They're like skinny jeans.
Skinny jeans, skinny. And so when they came out of the capsule, you saw them moving their arms around. They still didn't have total mobility, but the idea, presumably, is that SpaceX will have an iterative approach to these suits. So they will be used in some form for future missions. They'll be upgraded. And then, when people go to Mars at some point, maybe some futuristic version of this suit will be used.
Everyone's going to be wearing skinny jeans and skinny suits up on Mars. Wait a minute, Dana, when you just did that whole Mars interview last week, did the spacesuits come up?
We didn't really talk about the spacesuits. Kirsten and I were talking more about how people are going to eat on Mars and what their protein source is going to be. But I do have a question for Eric. I barely paid attention to this mission. All I knew was that a billionaire was one of the people on Polaris, John. So did he fund this whole thing? How did this whole sort of joint venture come about between these private people that wanted to go up and SpaceX being the launch provider that got them there?
That's a great point, is that so SpaceX supplied the rocket and the capsule, put it up. Jared Isaacman bankrolled it, right? We don't know how much he spent to do that, but he's a massive aviation enthusiast. He's a pilot. And then, of course, you have the SpaceX personnel that joined. And so this is part of the Polaris program, which is a multi-mission program bankrolled by Isaacman. This was one of the first steps, or the second flight, actually. The first time the private crew went around the Earth a few times and came back. This time they did a spacewalk. And then there'll be additional missions in the future that will culminate at some point with a crewed mission on one of SpaceX's colossal Starship rockets. Don't know when that is, and we don't know exactly what parameters or shape these missions will take, but it's part of the Polaris program.
Eric, we need to come back to Earth or closer to Earth and talk about this big deal that SpaceX's Starlink unit signed with United Airlines. Tell us about it.
Again, big week for SpaceX. This was a pretty landmark deal, a watershed moment. This was the first U.S. major airline that SpaceX has been able to woo to its Starlink service. So, as everyone knows, Starlink has grown to be the most advanced and largest, space-beamed internet service globally. They've made substantial inroads with maritime shippers, cruise lines. They are on some airlines already, like Air Baltic and Hawaiian and JSX. But they finally were able to crack into the U.S. aviation network. It's early. They have a lot to prove. But this deal is significant in that, they've got more than 3 million subscribers globally on the consumer side. So it's a strong sign to growth, and I think you saw that in the reaction of the stocks from legacy satellite operators.
I did notice that, VisaSat, which is one of those legacy providers, its stock collapsed 15% that day. GoGo, another one, fell a fair amount. Obviously, Max, Starlink and SpaceX are private companies, so it's hard to know just what kind of value investors are putting on a deal like this. But if you take the inverse of those collapses in those stocks, well, presumably it's an increase in the value of SpaceX and Starlink.
I just have to say, as someone who recently flew from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco on United, where I had to pay $8 for really lousy Wi-Fi, like, I think this is great, like, as a consumer. And and I think that Starlink is going to be a big revenue maker for SpaceX. I guess the question I always have is, like, when or is SpaceX going to spin out Starlink? Because at one point there was this whole idea that Starlink was going to be spun out as like a separate business and IPO separately from SpaceX as a whole, but we haven't really heard much about that recently. I mean, they're not separate companies. Starlink is basically like the big business unit within SpaceX.
So the one thing I'll say about this is that, like, it's great news, obviously, for SpaceX. Totally agree with what Eric's saying. But, like, these companies that you're talking about, Eric, Viasat, these are not large businesses, not by Elon Musk standards. Like, Viasat's market cap, I'm not sure how much.
Tiny.
It's tiny.
1.5 billion.
Yeah, 1.7. I just looked it up. And, you know, obviously the stock fell a lot. But with SpaceX, they're talking about valuations. And even if it's just Starlink, we're going to be talking about a much, much larger valuation. And I don't think it's clear yet that the company has come anywhere near living up to that. Selling internet to consumers is a very difficult, very competitive business. If to make this work, it's like going to be some combination of kind of the Elon Musk kind of ability to tell a story, and the story has to be that, like, they're taking the whole market because the markets for these things are not very large.
But, you know, Eric, for me, actually, I was thinking that as I see this deal get inked, and I think about the way it's increasingly being used in places like, you know, the remote, you know, farms in Brazil, certainly for all its, you know, defense and wartime applications, the way it's being used in maritime and so on and so forth, that to me, I feel like the business model and the growth model for Starlink are starting to come more clearly into focus. Max is obviously having none of it. What say you?
I think Max makes some very good
points.
Max
is full of it.
About the growth of Starlink and the challenges. When I saw this press release, my first thought is, okay, SpaceX has finally been able to demonstrate to a global U.S. carrier that this service can be better than what it has. It, for years, struggled to do that because they had capacity problems. And I have to get a little geeky for a second.
Please do.
The companies whose stocks were battered operate colossal satellites that are orbit in fixed position over the Earth, very high up, much higher than SpaceX's satellites. SpaceX's big idea is to have thousands of smaller satellites orbiting much closer to the Earth. And therefore, as the satellites whiz around the Earth and talk to each other, they can beam data down much quicker than these other satellites that are much higher up. Now, the higher up ones are really great because they orbit in a fixed position. And so you have a reliable stream of data right where you want it. And so the problem SpaceX needed to solve was that it needed to launch a huge number of satellites to be able to compete with this. So the scale, if you will, has started to tip in their favor. I do think Max makes a great point about the rollout because there's major questions about how this technology will perform on United flights.
And Eric, on that point, and with this, we need to wrap up here, my friend, but you said that this Starlink service is already being used on several airlines, including Hawaiian Air. How has it held up so far? Is it truly superior or even far superior to what you'd get on other flights and other carriers?
I mean, the reports overall are good, but SpaceX's Starlink is really good at rural and remote locations, so over the ocean, right? If you think about a shipper with its crew sitting in the middle of the Atlantic, that works. But as it encroaches closer and closer on dense urban areas where there's huge demand and pressure put on a single satellite from lots of consumers, that's when the service can start to break down.
Yeah, wasn't there a famous case a couple of years ago, like over Chicago or something?
Well, we made it famous.
You made it
by
famous.
Breaking the news. So SpaceX had this big trial, and they were with Delta, and they took a single flight up over Chicago, and this was a big demonstration flight for Starlink, a couple years back, to be fair. And Starlink wouldn't connect. They couldn't get it to work. And so SpaceX's quick solution was to shut down internet connection to the city of Chicago below, to all their customers. Then the flight worked. They proved it. It was great, big success. And then it was very embarrassing. So that's my point, is that they struggled with capacity, but it appears that they are overcoming those challenges and making inroads with the carriers. Question is, who's next, right? Can they get Delta? Can they get American? Can they get Southwest? Can they expand that? It appears, the momentum feels like it's in their favor.
All right. Good stuff, Eric. We really, really appreciate you having you on. Same to you as always, Max and Dana.
Thanks so much, Eric.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Great to be here.
This episode was produced by Stacey Wong, Naomi Shavin, and Rehan Harmansi are our senior editors. The idea for this very show also came from Rehan. Blake Maples handles engineering and David Purcell fact checks. Our supervising producer is Magnus Henriksen. The Elon Inc. theme is written and performed by Taka Yasuzawa and Alex Sugiura. Brendan Francis Newnham is our executive producer, and Sage Bauman is the head of Bloomberg Podcasts. A big thanks, as always, to our supporter, Joel Weber. I'm David Papadopoulos. If you have a minute, rate and review our show. It'll help other listeners find us. See you next week.